Not all World War II stories unfold on battlefields. Some were fought in kitchens, factories, and small-town streets where quiet sacrifices echoed louder than gunfire. What happens when war invades the home? Tonight we'll uncover 12 overlooked World War II dramas that reveal the hidden struggles of the home front movies, forgotten by time but brimming with resilience, heartbreak, and hope. Since You Went Away, 1944. When released in 1944, Since You Went Away was hailed as one of the defining American homefront dramas. Produced by David O. Selznick, the film starred Claudette Colbert as a middle-class mother navigating life while her husband serves overseas. Though well-received at the time, it has since been overshadowed by more famous wartime films, leaving it largely overlooked by modern audiences. The film dared to expose the daily toll of absence, rationing, and loneliness. Unlike propaganda shorts designed to boost morale, Selznick's film lingered on small but devastating details. A vacant chair at the dinner table, a daughter questioning whether her father will return, the mother's quiet breakdown while ironing. These were struggles most Americans recognized in their own homes during 1944, and the realism gave the film a raw, emotional power. Behind the scenes, Selznick micromanaged every frame, demanding authenticity to capture the pain of separation. His meticulous style caused delays, ballooning the budget, but it also gave the film a sincerity that still resonates. Despite Academy Award nominations, its prestige waned after the war, buried beneath louder, more heroic narratives of soldiers in combat. Today, Since You Went Away deserves recognition not as wartime propaganda, but as a tender portrait of the women and families who kept life moving in silence. It reminds us that war is fought not only with weapons, but with endurance, patience, and unshakable love. Tender Comrade, 1943. At first glance, Tender Comrade looks like a patriotic drama about women working together on the home front while their husbands fight abroad. Directed by Edward Dmytryk and starring Ginger Rogers, the film was a modest success at the box office. But decades later, it gained notoriety not for its story, but for the scandal it triggered during the Red Scare. Audiences at the time saw it as a heartfelt reflection of wartime solidarity. Rogers plays a young war bride who moves into a communal household with other women to save money and survive rationing. Their shared struggles, waiting for letters, enduring loss, and learning resilience struck a chord with viewers who lived that reality every day. But the script, written by Dalton Trumbo, contained dialogue that some later critics interpreted as leaning toward collectivist values. In the 1,950 seconds, that was enough to condemn the film as un-American. Both Dmytryk and Trumbo were blacklisted, and Tender Comrade became a cautionary tale of how even stories about loyalty and sacrifice could be twisted into political weapons. Forgotten by many today, the film's legacy lies in its dual role: a genuine tribute to wartime women and a victim of Cold War paranoia. Watching it now, one can't help but reflect on how patriotism and politics often clash and how ordinary lives caught in between carry the heaviest weight. The Human Comedy, 1943. When MGM released The Human Comedy in 1943, critics praised its sentimentality and humanity. Starring Mickey Rooney in one of his finest dramatic performances, the film follows a teenager working at a telegraph office in small-town California, delivering messages that often contain the dreaded news of fallen soldiers. It was a massive hit at the time, earning Rooney an Oscar nomination. Yet despite its initial acclaim, the movie slipped into obscurity as the decades passed. Part of the reason lies in its unabashed sentimentality. Post-war audiences shifted toward grittier depictions of conflict, leaving The Human Comedy dismissed as overly sentimental. But in truth, that very sentimentality is what makes it powerful. Behind the camera, director Clarence Brown worked closely with author William Saroyan, whose novel the film adapts. Saroyan, a master of weaving poetry into everyday life, infused the story with warmth and tragedy. Rooney's character embodies the youthful innocence of America at war, forced to mature too quickly under the shadow of loss. The film's most haunting moments come not from battle scenes, but from Rooney's trembling voice as he reads telegrams to families. His innocence becomes the nation's, cracked by grief but buoyed by hope. While largely forgotten today, the human comedy reminds us that wars are measured not just in victories, but in the small-town lives forever changed. Tomorrow, the World, 1944. Upon release, Tomorrow, the World startled audiences with its unusual subject matter, a Nazi youth brought to live in an American household during the war. Starring Frederick March as the widowed professor who takes in his German nephew, the film quickly divided critics. Some hailed it as daring, while others saw it as a melodramatic curiosity. Over time, it drifted into obscurity, overshadowed by more straightforward wartime dramas. What made the film so unusual was its refusal to paint war in purely black and white terms. The boy, indoctrinated in Hitler's ideology, becomes a disruptive force within the professor's family. His hostility toward democracy and his chilling loyalty to Nazi doctrine exposed American audiences to an unsettling question. What happens when the enemy isn't across the ocean, but sitting at your dinner table? Behind the scenes, the production wrestled with how far to go in depicting the boy's fanaticism. Early drafts softened his cruelty, fearing backlash, but Frederick March pushed for authenticity. The final cut preserved the boy's disturbing indoctrination, making the film one of the few wartime dramas to confront fascism as a psychological infection rather than simply a foreign threat. Though forgotten by many today, Tomorrow, the World is a daring reminder that war infiltrates even the sanctuaries of home and that the battle for minds and values can be more frightening than the clash of armies. The Pied Piper, 1942. Released in the midst of World War II, The Pied Piper brought audiences a different kind of home-front story. Monty Woolley starred as an aging Englishman who, while attempting to escape France during the Nazi invasion, unwillingly becomes guardian to a group of refugee children. Critics praised its humanity, and the film even earned several Academy Award nominations. Yet, in the decades that followed, it faded from public memory. What set this drama apart was its balance between adventure and vulnerability. Unlike Hollywood's glossy war epics, The Pied Piper focused on an ordinary man drawn into extraordinary responsibility. The reluctant guardian transforms from a cantankerous traveler into a figure of quiet bravery. His journey became a metaphor for countless civilians pulled into war not by choice, but by necessity. Behind the camera, the production faced challenges. Filmed under tight restrictions due to wartime shortages, sets had to be modest and props recycled. But this limitation worked in the film's favor, creating an atmosphere of stripped-down realism. Claudia, 1943, saw their own sacrifices mirrored back, doing more with less, enduring hardship, and rising to unexpected calls of duty. Today, The Pied Piper stands as an overlooked gem. It is a reminder that war often transforms the unwilling into unlikely heroes, and that survival is sometimes achieved not through weapons, but through compassion and endurance. Claudia, 1943. While most wartime dramas focused on soldiers or families in crisis, Claudia dared to spotlight something more subtle: the strain of war on young marriage. Starring Dorothy McGuire in her film debut, the story follows a naive young wife navigating adulthood while her husband prepares to leave for service. It was warmly received upon release, but quickly fell into the shadow of grander war narratives. At its core, Claudia was not about battles abroad, but about emotional battles at home, immaturity giving way to resilience. McGuire's performance captured a woman torn between clinging to innocence and embracing responsibility. Audiences, many of them young wives themselves, recognized their own vulnerabilities on screen. Behind the scenes, Fox executives were unsure whether the quiet domestic tale would resonate during wartime, but the film's box office success proved that intimacy could be as compelling as action. The studio capitalized on its popularity with a sequel, Claudia and David, but the original remains the more poignant reflection of wartime anxiety. Though rarely discussed today, Claudia highlights how war forced entire generations into adulthood overnight. Its overlooked brilliance lies in showing that the battlefield wasn't always overseas. Sometimes it was in the living room, where love, fear, and uncertainty collided. The Very Thought of You, 1944. When The Very Thought of You premiered, it was overshadowed by splashier wartime dramas. Starring Dennis Morgan and Eleanor Parker, the film follows a whirlwind romance between a soldier on leave and a young woman navigating the difficulties of rationing, family disapproval, and uncertainty about the future. Though modestly successful at the box office, it was soon buried beneath the decade's larger wartime productions. Unlike propaganda-heavy features, this film focused on intimacy and the fragility of love under pressure. Its power lies in showing how war accelerated everything: courtships, marriages, goodbyes. Soldiers had only days before deployment, and couples rushed into vows, knowing tomorrow was never promised. Morgan and Parker captured this urgency, giving their performances a tenderness both hopeful and heartbreaking. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers aimed to reflect the real experiences of American women waiting at home. Rationing, cramped living, and family interference were written with authenticity, and many women in 1944 saw their own struggles mirrored on screen. Yet critics later dismissed the film as too sentimental, forgetting that sentimentality itself was the language of wartime love. Today, The Very Thought of You reminds us that survival wasn't just about factories or fronts, it was also about holding fast to fleeting moments of joy when the future seemed impossibly uncertain. The Clock, 1945. Considered one of Judy Garland's most underrated performances, The Clock tells the story of a young woman who meets and falls in love with a soldier, Robert Walker, on a 48-hour leave in New York City. While Garland was known for musicals, this marked her first dramatic, non-singing role, and she delivered a performance that critics hailed as authentic and moving. The film itself was a quiet box office hit, but it never achieved the enduring fame of Garland's musicals. That's a shame, because The Clock captures the fleeting, heightened emotions of wartime like few films ever did. Every moment between the couple feels urgent. Every word, every kiss, every promise borrowed against the possibility of tragedy. Production wasn't easy. Director Fred Zinnemann was fired early, replaced by Garland's then-husband Vincente Minnelli. Under his direction, the film became not only a love story but also a love letter to New York City. Filmed largely on meticulously constructed studio sets, it convincingly recreated the bustle of trains, parks, and city streets. Audiences who saw it in 1945 knew the truth behind the romance. Countless real couples were saying hasty goodbyes on station platforms. Watching it today, The Clock still aches with longing. It's an overlooked treasure, one that shows war's cruelest cost wasn't only lives, it was time itself. This Above All, 1942. Among wartime romances, This Above All stood out for its unapologetic patriotism mixed with deep personal conflict. Released in 1942, it starred Tyrone Power and Joan Fontaine in a story about a privileged Englishwoman who shocks her family by enlisting as a nurse and falling in love with a disillusioned soldier hiding his shame for desertion. It was a critical and commercial success, but today it's rarely revisited outside classic film circles. Audiences embraced its bold themes. Fontaine's character challenged gender expectations, choosing service over society parties. Power's soldier, bitter and traumatized, gave voice to doubts and moral complexities that many real servicemen carried. At a time when propaganda painted war in absolute heroics, the film acknowledged fear, desertion, and disillusionment. Behind the scenes, director Anatol Litvak fought to preserve these darker shades. Studio executives worried that portraying a soldier negatively might damage morale, but Litvak and Power insisted, believing that honest conflict would resonate more deeply. They were right. The film earned an Academy Award for Fontaine and critical praise for its emotional honesty. Forgotten now in the shadow of bigger war epics, this above all deserves recognition for daring to suggest that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. In its honesty, the film captures a truth many homefront families quietly knew but rarely spoke aloud. Mrs. Miniver, 1942. When Mrs. Miniver was released, it became a cultural phenomenon. Starring Greer Garson as a British housewife whose family faces the escalating horrors of war, the film was an enormous hit both in the United States and abroad. It won 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and Winston Churchill himself praised it as more powerful than a fleet of destroyers. At the time, audiences embraced it as a symbol of Allied resilience. Yet, in later decades, its reputation shifted. Some critics dismissed it as wartime propaganda, designed more to rally American sympathy for Britain than to portray authentic domestic struggle. This perception led to its slow fade from mainstream memory, even as it remained an Oscar darling. Behind the camera, director William Wyler himself, a German-born immigrant, fought for realism. He demanded the film depict both courage and loss, most famously in the scene where Mrs. Miniver comforts her daughter-in-law after a bombing raid. That quiet grief, delivered with Garson's understated power, left audiences in tears. Wyler later joined the U.S. Army Air Forces and filmed combat footage over Europe, giving his perspective even more weight. Today, Mrs. Miniver stands as one of the most moving portraits of the home front, once celebrated, now underappreciated. Its fading reputation shouldn't obscure its truth, that endurance, dignity, and sorrow defined war in the kitchen as much as on the battlefield. The White Cliffs of Dover, 1944. Released at the height of the war, The White Cliffs of Dover starred Irene Dunne as an American woman who marries an Englishman only to see her idyllic life shattered by the outbreak of 2 world wars. The film, sprawling in scope, spans decades, chronicling how global conflict transforms ordinary family life into a saga of loss and resilience. Audiences in 1944 responded warmly to its patriotic title song and sweeping melodrama. Yet, despite its initial impact, the film became one of MGM's forgotten prestige pictures, overshadowed by flashier musicals and post-war dramas. Today, it is rarely revisited, despite its moving attempt to bridge American and British perspectives. Behind the scenes, the production faced a challenge: how to tell a war story with no combat scenes. Director Clarence Brown leaned into emotion instead, focusing on Dunne's performance as a woman forced to endure separations, deaths, and sacrifices. Her transformation from a romantic bride to a grieving mother mirrored what countless women experienced during both world wars. Though overlooked now, the film offers a haunting lesson. Wars do not simply pass when treaties are signed. They ripple across generations, shaping families and nations alike. The White Cliffs of Dover is less about victory and more about survival, a truth as relevant today as it was in 1944. The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, 1944. Unlike the solemn dramas on this list, The Miracle of Morgan's Creek dared to treat the home front with biting satire. Directed by Preston Sturges, the film follows a small-town girl who, after a wild night at a soldier's farewell party, finds herself pregnant and married to someone whose name she can't remember. At its release, it was both a box office hit and a lightning rod for controversy. Audiences laughed at its outrageous plot, but beneath the comedy lay a sharp commentary on wartime hysteria, community gossip, and the pressures placed on women. Critics today recognize it as one of the boldest comedies of the era, sneaking past censors by cloaking social critique in slapstick humor. Behind the scenes, Sturgis fought bitterly with the Production Code Office, which objected to everything from the implied pregnancy to the chaotic portrayal of small-town values. Miraculously, the film passed with creative compromises, leaving in enough subversion to scandalize and delight audiences. While rarely remembered as a war film, The Miracle of Morgan's Creek deserves its place among homefront dramas for daring to expose the absurdity of wartime moral panic. It reminds us that humor, too, was a survival tool in times of fear and uncertainty. The battlefield wasn't only overseas, it was in kitchens, on city streets, and in the hearts of families left behind. These 12 overlooked films capture that truth with poignancy, satire, and grace. If these hidden gems moved you, like and subscribe, and share your own forgotten wartime favorites in the comments below.